And if you look back, I like to sometimes do this. One of the points I try to make at Brock University, which I'm sure is common to everybody who teaches in religion, is that you can't take modern science back to look at ancient people. And you can't ask ancient people to think like modern people. So we have to really try to understand ancient people in their context and with the tools they had to understand the world. And if you doubt that, then I have this great challenge. If you want to believe Aristotle and Aristotle's explanation of gravity, and ask me or tell me if you think that's better than Newton and then what we have after Newton in Einstein's universe. And that's very abstract, so then I can get a little bit more technical. Well, what if you're ill and you're a biblical literalist? I will treat you according to the dictates of Leviticus. Do you want that? And if you don't like those, there's another person, Galen of Pergamon, who was an ancient and well-known physician. And I'm willing to treat anybody according to his way of going about things. I might drill a hole in your head accordingly, but that's there too. So it's when you encounter very practical things, healing sickness, understanding it, or explaining natural phenomenon, that you begin to realize how different ancient people were from modern people, and the fact that they didn't have science to go by. What they did go by, and what Joe pointed out really excellently, is they had to go by metaphysics. They went by principles first, and then descended into the natural world, and we do absolutely the opposite. We start with the natural world and try to figure out how it works first on its own. All right, so let me turn this on. There we go. Okay, so I want to start with nominalism and how it breaks apart the Platonic worldview and the kind of problems that it has given us. As Joe was pointing out, and I'm just going to use a word that he didn't use, the word for Plato that we have in Christianity and that marks Plato is the word substance. And it's used in the doctrine of the Trinity. Essentially, it is a word taken from Greek, ousia, which really is like being or essence. And it means that the permanent thing is what we don't see, and the phenomenal thing is what we do see. So in order to answer a very practical question, how is it that I can look at a donkey and I can look at a horse and I know a donkey, every time I see a donkey, I know it's not a horse. Every time I see a horse, I know it's not a donkey. How is that possible? And the answer is, as Joe eloquently pointed out, the answer is, I know the ideas. The answer is, there's horseness. There's horse substance. And there's donkey substance, and there's donkeyness, if you like. And I know the difference. So when I see a horse, I know no matter how variable the phenomenon is, in other words, there's all kinds of breeds and colors and shapes and sizes of horses, but every time I see one, I know it's a horse because I know horse substance, I know horseness. And so Diogenes Laertius said that Plato asserts that the object of the senses is that which never abides in quality or quantity, but is ever in flux. But the object of thought is something constant from which nothing is subtracted, to which nothing is added. So the individual horse is what is always in flux. The individual human being is what is always in flux. Natural objects are always in flux. But there's humanness and there's horseness, and these don't go beyond, these do not participate in the flux of nature, the fluctuations. But even ancient people could question this, and one of the great comics was the cynic Diogenes, another Diogenes, who said to Plato, apparently, as the tradition goes, I can see tables and cups, but I can't see tableness and cupness. So there was, even against Plato, a kind of critique in antiquity, but largely speaking, the Platonic world was used for all the reasons that Joe talked about. It made sense, and then when Christianity began to gain power in the Roman world, it made especially rhetorical sense out of the Christian writings, and eventually more or less created Christian theology. And this was all very well and good until about the 13th or 14th century, when something happened which is called nominalism. So nominalism is where the problem starts, and it starts for us here too. We often think that in historical Jesus studies, the problem starts, and in fact I kind of began there myself, with science and the impact of science, technical science, and the consequences of that, one being technical history, on our modern situation. The consequences of it related to the Bible, and the Bible becoming incredible for us. But in fact, the problem really starts with nominalism, or at least it has some roots in nominalism, and I want to show why, and I think this is very important ultimately to postmodern thinking and to the shift that happens sometime around the 20th century, early 20th century, which I will indicate, I hope, is a shift from substance and substance understanding of Christianity to time, and the time understanding of Christianity. So nominalism is a word that comes from the Latin word nomen, and it means name-ism. So one of the key figures in nominalism is William of Occam, and we probably have all heard in one way or another about Occam's razor. In fact, I just used it myself this morning. It's always important to have a few attempts at humor when you're dealing with serious things. Although I don't know how successful I am, but I try now and then. And Occam's razor simply says that if you shouldn't multiply substances unnecessarily. So if you're looking at a horse, and if you don't need to use horseness to explain why you can see the phenomenal variety of horses, then don't use the substance horseness. And that's basically the insight of nominalism, that we don't have to have substance anymore. So what happens is that what I simply have is the experience of a horse. I'm not sure why I like that example, but anyway, it's a good one. It might be, does Plato use it? I can't remember. I thought I read once. I'm not sure. Anyway. But the cups and tables is there. Anyway, so basically Occam is saying that what happens is you have all these experiences and you learn to name them. So the substance, or if you like, the essence of a horse is an impression I have just by the habit of using the name horse, because I grew up and I learned that that's a horse. So it's all in my mind. So sometimes nominalism, a type of nominalism, is called conceptualism, that the concept is in the name, that the universal comes from employing the name. And this actually ends up being very close to David Hume, who I might touch on in a few minutes. But what happened was, once you started thinking like this, then there became, Joe pointed out how the Platonic world sort of rises and descends like a ladder. There's not really a division. You kind of make your way up to the top, to the Enlightenment, but that's really connected down to the natural world as well. But in nominalism, there's a separation between these worlds, and it becomes very distinct. God now is completely in the realm of revelation, and nature is in the realm of nature. So now there's a kind of a gap between the two. And the consequence is that God becomes free of nature. But nature also becomes free of God. We don't have to employ substance anymore to talk about God. And this was fantastic for Protestant reformers because it meant that what we see is no longer necessary. Anything to do with God no longer has the connection to necessity, to essence.